Oh, Rob,
There you go. Right. Okay.
thank you very much. Lovely to be back. Lovely to be on school holidays to be able to be back here. That's the main thing over here. So we're obviously entering the parashas of Yosef and the brothers. Rabbi Sachs, I think, mentions it's the longest continuous narrative in the Torah. I think maybe apart from the Jews leaving Egypt, but whatever. But it's the longest continuous story, where we learn about the initial arguments, the downfall, the sale of Yosef, um, his meteoric rise to power, next week's parasha, and then the reconciliations the week afterwards, and then the conclusion with Yaakov's final last will and testament in sort of 3 4 weeks time. So yeah, one of I suppose Klal Israel's favorite stories. Also, it's gone well beyond sort of being beloved by the Jewish people. It's one of those that's definitely out there as being sort of it's an inspirational story for the world around us. Ask Jason Donovan or whatever it is who's doing it now. Um, so there's a fascinating question which underlies the whole story of Yosef and the brothers, which is as follows. And it's already hinted to by Rashi and asked by the Ramban, which is that I mean, it's next week. Yosef ends up in having the dreams, and Paro has the dreams, and Yosef interprets the dreams. And Yosef very quickly becomes viceroy, whatever a viceroy is. It's one of those old school words, prime minister of Egypt. Very quickly, he's got the entire country almost underneath his thumb. And the question is asked, if so, why did he not send a message to his father? So he was in charge of Egypt. Why did he not at that some point in those sort of 22 years or so after he was there? Why did he just not send a message to his father? That they weren't so far away. Um, Next caravan, I wanted to send a secret message or a public message to my father in order to tell him that everything's okay and don't worry about me. I've made it. Why did he wait the entire story um, to uh, to happen? So that's the Ramban's question. Okay, so that's his question. Why did Yosef not send a message back to Yaakov say, "Don't worry, everything is a okay"? Anyone come across the question before? Anyone on the any answers? Oh, interesting. Okay, so we'll get to that in a minute. Very good. Any other thoughts or suggestions? Yeah, Yosef. No, but why didn't Yosef send the message? Interesting. So even if he, as the prime minister of the country, sent a message with the secret codes and brought him there, he could have nevertheless he might not be believed. My father could have been involved in this well. Never, yeah, yeah. So having an MI5 agent in the royal family, I mean, that's a crazy thing to suggest. Um, yeah, it can never happen. Okay, so the Ramban asked that question. His answer is that Yosef was Yosef had his dreams at the beginning of the parasha. When he sees the sun and the moon bowing down. So it's a really rational answer. He sees the sun and the moon bowing down to him, and he realizes that the brothers need to sort of work their way down. So these answers are very similar to one another, but basically that Yosef, sorry, for whatever reason, either because the dreams were a prophecy that needed to be fulfilled, or I think really what the Ramban's answer is that what Yosef was trying to do was trying to make sure that the brothers did teshuvah. Right? So that Yosef had a mission, and either that mission was to make sure the prophecies were, or in order to make sure his brothers did teshuvah. So in order to do that, the whole story was engineered by Yosef because that was so important to him. And I think we just the Ramban's answer teaches us the value or the power of teshuvah. That Yosef was willing to leave his father in the dark for decades in order to help to help his brothers do teshuva. They had done something that was utterly it was utterly insane. Why they did it is a separate discussion. What was their motivation and what precisely was their goal. we'll have to save that for another time. But answer really number one is that the value of teshuva was so important that overrodes the concerns about Yaakov's welfare. And again, for us, I think that's an extremely powerful lesson. That making sure that people do the right thing at the end of the day almost overpowers our own comfort, our own needs, and the needs. I mean, in this case, the needs of his father Yaakov. Yaakov would have been okay. Yaakov was a son. Yaakov was okay in this world and the next world, but his brothers needed saving, and so for the whole plot was in order to engineer this. So that's answer number one. The whole story is a story about Teshuvah. And so everything we're going to read, it was engineered by Yosef in order to make sure that the brothers do Teshuvah. So that's answer number one. Um, Answer number two, and there's, I'm sure there are many, many more. But answer number two, which is interesting, is what we were saying before. So this answer is suggested by Rav Yol Ben Nun. So Rav Yol Ben Nun is one of them now in the Gush in the Shiva Halcyon, and he says as follows. It's an amazing answer. So he says if we look at the story um, from Yosef's perspective. So Yosef at the beginning of the story is what we were saying just before. So Yosef at the beginning of the story, he seems to be favored. He's given the coat. Um, he knows his brothers are not so happy with him. Yaakov, his father, seems to be favoring him despite that. And the tensions are building and building. So, but then all of a sudden, Yosef is then sent on a mission by his father, even though that he knows it's dangerous. So he's sent on a mission by his father to be with the brothers. And then when he gets there, everything goes pear-shaped. He ends up being sold, and the story then begins. Um, Yosef never realizes, that once the brothers go back, um, Yaakov, their father, castigates them. The Parsha tells us that he kind of looked out for it, and he was waiting to happen. That the brothers lied to Yaakov. So Yosef never hears all of these details. All Yosef knows is that he turns up and his brothers suddenly sort of try and kill him and then send him off. So and this is what Rabbi Ben suggests, is that from Yosef's perspective, and this is utterly terrifying, um, that when from Yosef's perspective, Yaakov might have been in on it to start off, whatever reasons, maybe in order to get him to repent, or maybe to get him to get on with brothers, he doesn't really know. But um, Yosef, Yosef's last contact is that of his father sending him away to a very dangerous situation. And so Rav then suggests that that was the last thing that Yosef knew, and therefore Yosef felt that he'd been cut off from the family. So why did Yosef never try to make contact with his family? The answer is because he felt he'd been cut off by his father. And it's quite a terrifying answer. I mean, Raphael Ben Nun, it's this is quite a novel idea, but Raphael Ben Nun brings proofs to it, sort of to the story at the end when sort of he begins to hear about the brother's repentance, and then suddenly his spirit changes and he starts to cry. It's because this was news to him that that the brothers actually cared and that they regretted their deeds. The first he hears about it is decades later when sort of the brothers come in, say many years later, the brothers hear that it's all going pear shaped, and the famine is in progress, and that they turn up and he sees their pain. That's the first he hears about it. Um, so so from Yosef's perspective, the whole time um, he thought that his father was on it, and that's why he didn't send a message. And you have to read through the entire story to see how closely this fits, which I think is a very, very powerful idea. I mean, I think a lot of people bring a lot of questions on this, but it's a very powerful idea. So that's another very interesting suggestion. And there's another one which I read by Rav Golden, who has written a book called Unlocking the Torah Text. I don't know if anyone has seen it. It's a very good book in English now, like sort of having a deeper look at the parsha. And he says as follows, which he says, if you look at the very end of the story, so he doesn't go with Rav Yon Ben Nun's Mahalach, he goes a different suggestion. Which is if you look at the end of the story, when Yaakov dies, the story of the burial is very contrived. They have to, they're concerned to take him out of Mitzrayim. They're concerned that the Egyptian delegation has to go with in order to spy on them. The negotiations at the very end of the story are very, very tense. And also, Joseph at the end of the story never really properly reconciles with his brothers. He's always kind of a very aloof. So what Raphael suggests is that although the story, on surface level shows Joseph as being sort of extremely powerful and in charge of the entire country, um, perhaps he wasn't. Perhaps his position actually was really quite tenuous. One piece of evidence, so there's a very powerful piece of evidence, is that when the brothers first return to sit down with Joseph, that they're sat separately. We see that Joseph has to sit separately from the Egyptians because Hebrews don't believe in Egyptians. So he sits with his brothers, but he's not at the table with the other Egyptians. Um, and the suggestion is because you see that his position was actually very, very shaky. That although he had risen so far, that he was still an outsider. Um, and the negotiations at the end were because at the end of the day, Joseph was powerful, but he was still an outsider, and therefore taking his foot back to the land of Israel would have been seen as an act of rebellion, or leaving Egypt forever. They were very scared that would sort of cause their position to completely unravel. So Reb Golden says that really Joseph's position was actually far more tenuous, perhaps we might imagine, and maybe that was the reason why he had to be extremely careful about communicating with his family, because as soon as they got a sense that actually he was in communication with the land of Canaan, he was in communication with his family, who was prominent people in the land of Canaan, then perhaps his position as the second in command in Egypt would immediately fail. Um, this young whippersnapper from the land of Israel becomes very, very powerful very, very quickly. Maybe he's a spy, maybe he's trying to, usurp Egypt's power on behalf of the Canaanites or whatever it might be. And because of that, Joseph had to tread extremely carefully to the extent that he almost cut off communication for his entire life, or for many, many years with his family. It's another suggestion. I mean, there are many, many ideas over here. Everything is prescriptive. So as we're reading the Torah over the coming weeks, sort of keep some of these ideas in mind to try and look at some of the deeper ideas behind the Torah text. Thoughts from me there? Consider that.
in terms of the face the months ago, yeah, Rabbi,